The Zanari Empire's warship loomed over the colony, casting a shadow so vast it seemed to stretch across the horizon. Captain James Calloway stood on the bridge of the Resolute, his hands gripping the console in front of him as he watched the slaughter unfold on the view screen. The Zanari, tall, scaled, and utterly without mercy, descended in shimmering waves, their energy weapons vaporizing buildings and cutting down civilians. Humanity's fragile hope for coexistence was reduced to ash in real time. "Captain, the shields won't hold much longer." Ensign Rourke's voice cracked as he reported the inevitable. The young officer's face was pale, his hands trembling over the controls. Calloway didn't blame him. They were all terrified. "Divert auxiliary power to the shields," Calloway said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "And prepare an escape vector. We're not dying here." Dr. Malcolm Grayson, seated at a nearby terminal, barely looked up from his calculations. His dark, weathered features were etched with frustration as he muttered, "The Zanari's energy weapons are too efficient. Our defenses might as well be paper. Suggestions, Doctor?" Calloway's tone carried an edge, though not directed at Grayson. The scientist had been a reluctant addition to the crew, more comfortable in a lab than aboard a military vessel. But his brilliance had earned him a place here. "If we had more time, I could retrofit the energy dampener prototype," Grayson replied. "But considering our current predicament, I'd recommend running." "Running isn't a strategy." Sergeant Elijah Kane growled from the doorway, his combat armor scuffed and smeared with soot. The former Marine exuded a presence that was impossible to ignore. His sharp blue eyes scanned the room before settling on Calloway. "We can't keep letting these bastards walk all over us." "I don't intend to," Calloway replied, meeting Kane's gaze with equal intensity. "But dying here won't help anyone." Kane didn't respond immediately, but the tension in his jaw spoke volumes. He hated retreating almost as much as he hated the Zanari, but even he couldn't argue with the cold logic of survival. The ship shuddered violently as another blast from the Zanari warship struck their shields. Warning klaxons blared, and the lights flickered. "Shields at 10%. Rourke shouted. Calloway slammed his fist on the console. "Grayson, get me something, anything. That can buy us more time." Grayson's fingers danced across his terminal. "I can overload the main reactor to generate a pulse. It'll disable their targeting systems for a few seconds." "Do it," Calloway ordered without hesitation. "Rourke, plot the course. Kane, get your team ready to repel boarders in case they're crazy enough to follow us." As Grayson worked, Kane hesitated. "James," he said, using Calloway's first name for the first time in months, "you know they'll never stop. Running today just means fighting tomorrow." Calloway's expression softened, but his resolve didn't waver. "Then we'll fight tomorrow. But today, we live." The pulse fired, and for a brief moment, the Zanari warship's glowing weapons fell dark. The Resolute leapt into hyperspace, the stars stretching into streaks of light as they escaped. The silence that followed was deafening. Calloway turned to face his crew, his gaze lingering on each of them. Rourke's hands still trembled. Grayson's focus had shifted from his terminal to a datapad, but his jaw was tight. Kane leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed, his frustration evident. "This isn't over," Calloway said, his voice firm but not unkind. "The Zanari think we're weak, but they're wrong. We'll regroup, rebuild, and hit them where it hurts. Humanity isn't done yet." "Where?" Kane asked, his tone more resigned and defiant. "Earth doesn't have the resources to fight back. Most of the colonies are gone or compromised. What's left to regroup with?" Calloway stared at the star map, flickering on the main display. The Zanari's territory covered a third of the galaxy, and their forces were unmatched. Humanity's scattered remnants seemed insignificant by comparison. But insignificance was something humans had overcome before. "We still have our minds," Calloway said finally. "They underestimate us because we don't have their firepower or their numbers. But we've faced impossible odds before, and we've survived. We'll do it again." Grayson's voice cut through the room. We'll need to think outside the box, turn their own arrogance against them. I've been studying their tech for years. It's advanced, but not infallible. Good, Calloway said. Start working on something that can give us an edge. Kane pushed off the bulkhead. And what about the people who don't have a ship or a lab to hide in? The ones still on the ground, still fighting. Calloway met his gaze. We'll give them hope. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a silence of determination rather than despair. The crew dispersed to their tasks, and Calloway remained alone on the bridge, staring out at the endless expanse of space. The Zanari had taken everything from humanity, their homes, their families, their dignity. But they had made one critical mistake. They had left humans alive, and humans had a way of turning survival into victory. The asteroid base was a patchwork of salvage parts and desperate ingenuity, hidden in the debris field of a long-forgotten battle. Deep within its steel halls, the hum of activity never ceased. Engineers and scientists worked side by side, converting scrap into weapons and refining stolen Zanari technology. The air smelled of coolant and welding sparks, a constant reminder of how precarious their survival was. Captain James Calloway strode to the command center, his steps purposeful. The makeshift screens displayed endless streams of data, supply inventories, ship schematics, and tactical overlays. Around him, the core of Earth's resistance bustled, a fragile coalition of survivors and defectors who shared one thing in common, a burning hatred for the Zanari. Dr. Malcolm Grayson's voice pulled Calloway from his thoughts. James, over here. Grayson's lab was crammed with alien tech in various states of disassembly. The scientist himself was hunched over a control panel, his brow furrowed in concentration. His hands moved deftly as he adjusted settings on a cylindrical device humming with energy. Tell me it's good news, Calloway said, leaning against the edge of the workstation. Grayson straightened, brushing his hands on his grease-streaked coat. It's better than good. This prototype should disrupt Zanari energy's shielding for a brief window. Not long, but enough to hit them where it hurts. Calloway's eyes narrowed as he considered the implications. How brief? 10 seconds. 15 if we're lucky. Not much time to work with, Calloway muttered. Which is why we'll need Kane's team to be precise, Grayson added. The Zanari won't know what hit them. As if summoned, Sergeant Elijah Kane entered the lab, his broad frame filling the doorway. He carried an air of confidence born from years of leading men into impossible situations. His team trailed behind him, their footsteps heavy with the weight of the task ahead. You called? Kane's voice was gruff but tinged with curiosity. His eyes flicked to the prototype before returning to Calloway. What's the plan? Calloway stepped forward, pointing to a holographic display of a Zanari outpost orbiting a gas giant. This is our target. They're using it as a relay station for fleet communications. If we take it out, we'll disrupt their operations across this entire sector. Kane crossed his arms. And I'm guessing it's heavily fortified. Of course, Calloway replied with a faint smile. But Grayson's device gives us an opening. You'll have a 10-second window to breach their defenses and plant charges on the core. Kane's gaze didn't waver. 10 seconds. No room for error. You've handled worse, Calloway said. Kane nodded once. What about extraction? The Resolute will be standing by, Calloway said. We'll have to move fast once the charges are set. This mission isn't just about the outpost. It's about showing the Zanari we can strike back. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of the plan settling over them. Then Kane clapped his hands, breaking the tension. All right, you heard the captain. Gear up. We've got work to do. The infiltration began under the cover of the gas giant's magnetic storms. The Resolute slipped through the chaos, its retrofitted engine silent as it approached the outpost. Kane's team, clad in adaptive armor, moved with precision through the docking bay. Grayson's device, mounted on Kane's forearm, pulsed softly with energy. Inside the outpost, The Zanari were as imposing as ever, their hulking forms patrolling the corridors with mechanical precision. Kane signaled his team to hold. He activated the device, and a wave of energy rippled outward, rendering the Zanari shields momentarily useless. "Go!" Kane barked, his voice a low growl. The team sprang into action, their movements a choreographed dance of violence. Explosions tore through the outpost as charges were planted with ruthless efficiency. The Zanari, caught off guard, scrambled to respond, but Kane's team was already 2 steps ahead. Meanwhile, aboard the Resolute, Calloway monitored the operation with bated breath. "Status," he demanded. "Charges are set," Grayson reported from his station. "They've got 30 seconds to get out." Calloway's jaw tightened. "Bring us in closer. Prepare for extraction." The outpost erupted into chaos as the charges detonated, severing the Zanari's communications network in a blaze of fire and debris. Kane's team sprinted through the collapsing corridors, the path to the docking bay narrowing with every step. "Move, move, move," Kane shouted, his voice cutting through the din. They reached the airlock just as the Resolute docked, its doors sliding open to welcome them. The last team member dove inside as the ship pulled away, escaping the outpost's final death throes. As they cleared the blast radius, the crew erupted into cheers. The operation had been a success, but Calloway's expression remained grim. "This was just the beginning," he said quietly. Grayson nodded. "The Zanari will retaliate." "Let them," Kane said, removing his helmet. His face was streaked with sweat, but his eyes burned with resolve. "We're ready." Calloway looked out at the stars, his mind already on the next step. The galaxy was vast, and their resources were limited, but humanity's fire had been reignited. The Zanari had ruled unchallenged for too long, and now they had been reminded of an undeniable truth. Humans were at their most dangerous when backed into a corner. The Zanari fleet descended upon Earth, like a swarm of locusts, their warships blotting out the stars. From the bridge of the Resolute, Captain James Calloway surveyed the chaos unfolding on the planet below. Explosions dotted the surface as the invaders bombarded humanity's last strongholds. The Zanari were making good on their promise to crush any resistance. "They brought their entire fleet," Dr. Malcolm Grayson muttered, his face illuminated by the holographic tactical display. The sheer number of enemy vessels dwarfed anything humanity could muster, yet his voice carried a tone of defiance. "They think numbers are all that matter. They're about to learn otherwise," Calloway replied, his voice low and steady. His gaze shifted to the flagship at the center of the Zanari formation. It was a leviathan of a ship, bristling with weapons and housing the command corps that coordinated the entire fleet. "If we take out their flagship, the rest will crumble." Sergeant Elijah Kane, standing at the ready in full combat gear, gave a sharp nod. "And I'm guessing that's where I come in." Calloway turned to face him, his expression hard. "You and your team will infiltrate the flagship and disable its AI core. Without it, the Zanari will lose their tactical edge." "It's a one-way trip," Kane said matter-of-factly, though there was no hesitation in his voice. "Not if we do our jobs," Calloway countered. "The Resolute will draw their fire and create a distraction. You'll have the window you need to get in and out." Kane smirked. "Just make sure you keep that window open, Captain." As Kane's team boarded their stealth shuttle, Grayson approached Calloway. "This is insanity," he said, though his tone lacked the conviction to argue further. "Even if Kane succeeds, there's no guarantee we'll survive the counterattack." "Then we make our own guarantees," Calloway said, his eyes never leaving the tactical display. "Humanity doesn't get another chance. This is it." The Resolute surged forward, its engines roaring as it closed the distance to the Zanari fleet. The crew worked in unison, their movements precise and efficient. Calloway barked orders, his voice cutting through the tension. "Target their flanking ships. Keep them off Kane's shuttle." Grayson's device, the energy disruptor, hummed to life as the Resolute fired its modified weapons. Blasts of concentrated energy punched through the Zanari's shields, sending their ship spiraling out of control. For the first time, the invaders seemed vulnerable. "They're redirecting forces to intercept us," Grayson reported, his hands flying across the console. "Kane's shuttle is clear." On the flagship, Kane's team moved with ruthless efficiency. The Zanari defenders were larger and stronger, but humanity's soldiers were faster and better coordinated. Kane's adaptive armor absorbed glancing blows as he led the charge through the labyrinthine corridors. "Grayson, we're nearing the core," Kane said over the comm. "What kind of resistance should we expect?" "Heavy," Grayson replied. "The core is the brain of their fleet. They'll protect it at all costs." "Good," Kane said, hefting his rifle. "Let them come." Back aboard the Resolute, the situation grew increasingly dire. The ship rocked violently as Zanari weapons found their mark. Calloway gripped the console to steady himself. "Report. Shields are down to 20%, Rourke called out from the helm. "We can't take much more of this." "We'll hold," Calloway said, though his knuckles whitened as he tightened his grip. "We have to." In the heart of the flagship, Kane's team breached the core chamber. The AI core pulsed with a cold, eerie light, its tendrils extending into every part of the ship. The Zanari defenders fought with ferocity, but they were no match for the humans' determination. One by one, they fell. Kane approached the core, placing the charges with meticulous care. His breathing was heavy, but his focus was unshakable. "Charges set," he reported. "We're getting out." As the team retreated, the charges detonated and the flagship shuddered violently. The AI core's destruction sent shockwaves through the Zanari fleet. Their coordination faltered, ships veering off course and colliding in the chaos. "It's working," Grayson said, his voice filled with awe. "The entire fleet is in disarray." "Now's our chance," Calloway said. "Target the flagship. Finish it." The Resolute unleashed its full arsenal, striking the crippled flagship with precision. Explosions rippled across its surface as it disintegrated into a fiery cascade. The remaining Zanari ships, leaderless and disorganized, began to retreat. Cheers erupted across the Resolute. Calloway allowed himself a brief moment of relief before turning back to the calm Kane. "Status?" "We're clear." Kane's voice crackled over the comm, "Heading back to you now." As the shuttle docked, Calloway met Kane in the airlock. The sergeant's armor was scorched, his face streaked with soot, but his eyes gleamed with triumph. "You did it," Calloway said. Kane shrugged. "Just another day at the office." The victory was bittersweet. The Zanari fleet was broken, but Earth bore the scars of the invasion. Calloway stood on the bridge, staring out at the battered planet below. "This isn't the end," he said quietly. "They'll be back." "And we'll be ready," Grayson replied. For the first time in generations, humanity had struck fear into the heart of its oppressors. The galaxy would never forget this day, and neither would the Zanari.